Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a role that's, well, it's absolutely crucial in a lot of places, especially healthcare. We're talking about the authorization specialist. Our mission here is to really unpack what it takes to be good at this job to cut through some of the jargon.
Yeah, it's a role that it definitely demands precision, patience too. And you really need to understand the processes, the regulations. These specialists, they're kind of the gatekeepers, aren't they? Making sure services get covered, that payment happens smoothly. And often that means navigating some pretty complex rules and dealing with sensitive info.
Exactly. And our guide for this deep dive, our map, is an article called 20 Authorization Specialist Interview Questions and Answers.
Hmm.
But look, we're not just reading interview questions. We're using them like a lens,
Yeah.
to pull out the core skills, the knowledge, maybe even some surprising bits about the job itself. Think of this as, I guess, your shortcut to really getting what this role is all about.
That's a great way to put it. Because these questions, they really reveal the baseline skills, the everyday challenges, and just how much responsibility is involved.
Right.
By looking at what employers are asking, you get a really clear picture of what competence, what mastery looks like in this field.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting right at the beginning. Understanding the core of the role, the authorization process itself.
Right. So the very first thing an interviewer is going to want to know is about your actual practical experience with these processes and procedures.
Yeah.
They're checking basically, do you get the whole journey from when a request first comes in all the way to the final approval or sometimes denial?
Yeah.
And can you manage that effectively?
So you need to be ready to talk about past jobs where you touch this process. Like, did you review the requests? Check if the information was right. Talk to providers, patients, insurers.
Yes, exactly. And it's not just listing tasks. You got to highlight how you did it efficiently. Did you use certain systems? Maybe develop a specific routine. The source material really emphasizes talking about managing the entire process, start to finish, showing you the systems, the best practices, the rules, and that you're always aiming for efficiency, for effectiveness. It's about showing you can sort of shepherd that request through the system.
Got it. So it's the difference between just knowing the steps on paper and knowing how to actually walk those steps well. Makes sense. Now, part of navigating that isn't just doing it right, it's explaining it to others.
Ah, yes. Which brings us straight to a really key communication test.
Yeah.
You'll probably get asked about a time you had to explain the whole authorization process to a customer or maybe a client. And this question, it's not just testing if you know the process. It's testing if you can translate that knowledge clearly, concisely, for someone who probably finds it all pretty confusing, maybe even frustrating. Can you make them feel confident?
Okay, so if you've got a specific story, share it. If not, maybe talk through how you would handle it. Like, what's your method for breaking down something complicated?
Yeah, the key thing seems to be starting by clearly laying out the steps required. And, crucially, explaining why each step is necessary.
Hmm.
People need that context. Be ready for questions, answer them patiently, and really stress why following the steps correctly matters. The source even prints out that general customer service experience, say from a bank or something, is relevant here. It shows you can explain procedures.
That makes sense. It's less about the specific industry sometimes and more about that core skill of translating bureaucracy, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, moving on from just the basic process, this role carries a lot of responsibility, especially around rules, laws, sensitive data. Compliance is not just a nice to have. It's fundamental to avoid big risks.
And that's exactly what question 3 gets at. How do you make sure all your authorizations comply with the relevant laws and regulations? They need to know you're on top of the rules.
Right. You need to show you're proactive about it. How do you stay current? Read industry stuff, attend webinars, talk to colleagues. And then how does that translate into your actual work? How do you double check things? Use any software tools that might flag potential issues. The source mentions things like subscribing to publications, going to seminars, always double checking every single authorization, and maybe using automated systems to catch problems early.
Having those systems, those checks and balances, seems critical. But, sometimes the problem isn't on your end. It's missing information from the customer. Question 4 asks how you handle that customer needs authorization but lacks the paperwork.
Ah, yeah, that's a common one. And it tests your problem solving, definitely, but also how you stay professional under pressure.
Yeah.
Your first thought has to be customer service, even when you might have to give them news they don't want to hear, which is, we can't proceed just yet.
Right. You can't magic the documents into existence, but you can guide them. So how would you work with the customer in that spot?
Well, you'd explain why the documents are needed, calmly, clearly. Then you actively help them figure out how to get them. The source suggests maybe giving them info on where to obtain the docs, or even exploring alternatives if authorization just isn't possible right then. Maybe discuss payment options. The goal is always to find a solution, or at least help them see the path forward, all while staying professional and confident.
Yeah, it's walking that tightrope between the process rules and actually helping the person. And speaking of rules, especially in healthcare, things like HIPAA, other privacy laws, they're absolutely non-negotiable.
You bet. Question 5 hits this directly. Are you familiar with HIPAA and other healthcare privacy laws? Because authorization specialists handle incredibly sensitive stuff. Protecting patient privacy is just paramount.
So you need to show you really know your stuff here. Talk about specific times you ensured compliance and past roles. What steps did you actually take? Did you have extra measures in place? Mentioning any specific training or certifications you have would definitely help, right?
Oh, absolutely. The example answer in the source is quite strong, saying things like very familiar, talking about ensuring compliance at a big hospital system, mentioning regular process monitoring, and having specialized training. That kind of detail shows you don't just know the theory, you've applied it and you're committed to it.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the day-to-day reality. Managing the workload, dealing with people, sometimes people who are stressed or upset.
Yeah, managing multiple things at once is just part of the job. Question 6 asks about your strategies for staying organized when you're juggling numerous authorizations. This really shows if you can handle the volume, track all the details, and basically keep all the plates spinning.
So what's your system? How do you prioritize? Use digital tools, software. Are you a checklist person?
The source mentions things like prioritizing based on urgency or how important something is, using scheduling tools or software to track progress, making checklists, and importantly, keeping detailed notes of conversations or interactions. Those notes are probably gold for remembering the little details and changes. It shows you have a repeatable system to handle the volume without letting things fall through the cracks.
Detailed notes, the unsung hero, right? Now, even if you run a tight ship, sometimes customers just get frustrated.
It happens. It definitely happens. Question 7 dives right into that. How do you handle customers who get frustrated during the process? This tests your ability to stay calm, stay professional, and try to guide the interaction to the best possible outcome, even if you have to say no to a request or ask for tricky verification info.
So how do you de-escalate? How do you explain a denial or why you need certain info so they actually understand the reason behind it?
First step is stay calm, stay professional. Take the time needed to clearly explain the why. Then really focus on finding solutions. Are there alternatives you can offer? Can you connect them with someone else who might be able to help? The source emphasizes staying calm, explaining the reasoning, and actively trying to find solutions or point them towards other resources. Maybe even going a bit above and beyond if you can, to make the experience as positive as possible under the circumstances.
Demonstrating that empathy and problem solving even when things are tense. Okay, another tricky one. What about when what the customer thinks is covered doesn't line up with what the insurance company says? Question 14 tackles that.
Yeah, this is where you might need to put on your negotiation hat as well as your explanation hat. You've got to clarify the gap for the customer and maybe even push back a bit with the insurance company.
So how would you approach explaining that kind of complex coverage issue to someone who's probably already confused or worried?
Well, first, make sure they understand, in simple terms, why the insurance isn't covering what they expected. Then, you could talk about how you'd approach the insurance company. The source suggests things like maybe asking for a higher reimbursement level or suggesting different payment plans. It really helps if you're familiar with insurance rules and laws so you can advocate effectively for the best coverage possible for that customer.
So you're not just pushing paper. You're interpreting, sometimes advocating, maybe even negotiating a little. But even with all that effort, sometimes the customer just won't agree with the final decision on their authorization. Question 19 hits on this tough spot.
Oh yeah, that requires real tact. Diplomacy. Top-notch customer service skills. You're dealing with someone's disappointment, and they need to feel heard.
First step has to be empathy, right? Just acknowledging their frustration, really listening.
Absolutely. Listen first. Then, explain how you'd objectively review the decision again. Point to the specific policies or regulations that led to that outcome. If they still disagree, or even if they accept it but are unhappy, see if there's any alternative solution you can offer, or maybe other resources they could tap into. The goal, like the source says, is for the customer to feel heard and respected, and to help them get the best possible outcome, even if that's not the original approval they wanted.
Okay, so we've covered people skills, process knowledge. Let's talk tech and the absolute need for accuracy in records.
Right. Especially in healthcare, working with electronic health records, EHRs, is usually fundamental. So, question 8 asks directly about your experience with those systems. Specialists are in these systems all day, verifying, updating patient info.
You need to show you're comfortable there. Mention specific systems you've used. The source list, Epic, Cerner, Allscripts as common examples.
Yeah, describe what you did in them. Verifying info, entering data, updating records, maybe running reports. If you ran into problems, how did you solve them? Did you find ways to make things work better or more accurately? The example talks about verifying accuracy and completeness, knowing the standard processes, using specific systems, generating reports, and even developing little solutions like templates or automating some functions.
Finding those little efficiencies shows real initiative, doesn't it? And speaking of accuracy, just verifying the information the customer gives you in the first place is step one, yeah.
Oh, absolutely critical. Question 9 is all about the specific steps you take to verify customer info. This makes sure everything's accurate, checks eligibility, and helps you catch any discrepancies early before they snowball into bigger issues.
So what's your process? Are you cross-checking data points, confirming dates, times, making sure signatures are there?
Exactly. The source suggests reviewing documents carefully does the info match. Are dates right? Cross-checking against other available sources for consistency. Going through the file to make sure everything's signed and that the customer knows about any potential risks or issues involved. It's really about diligent verification.
But even with great processes and checks, the systems themselves aren't perfect, right? They can glitch out.
They definitely can.
Uh,
And question 13 asks about a time you had to troubleshoot a problem with an authorization system. This tests not just your technical troubleshooting skills, but also how you communicate about the problem with, IT teams, maybe customer service, and even customers themselves.
Right, the classic behavioral question, tell me a story. So describe a specific issue you ran into. How did you figure out what was wrong? What steps did you take to fix it?
And crucially, what did you learn from it? The source gives an example about troubleshooting credit card issues for a retailer, identifying the problem, working with IT, communicating the fix to customer service and customers. And the big takeaway highlighted was the importance of communication and collaboration to get things resolved.
Collaboration is always key when tech goes sideways. Okay, and finally, on this technical track, keeping accurate records. It's not just good practice, it's often a legal requirement.
Absolutely. Question 15 asks point blank about your strategies for maintaining accurate authorization records. This shows you get how important it is, including the legal side.
So explain why it matters to you, then detail your methods. Do you double check every entry? Keep a log? How do you track expiration dates? Use specific software.
Yes, you really need to stress the critical need for accuracy, sometimes for legal reasons. Mention things like double-checking entries before they get submitted, keeping detailed logs that include expiration dates, doing regular reviews of records, and using software tools that help track things and maybe send alerts for upcoming expirations. The source stresses taking every precaution for accuracy.
Diligence seems to be the watchword here. Okay, let's wrap things up by looking at a few more specific challenges and how this role often involves contributing to the team and maybe even improving processes.
Right. One of the toughest balancing acts is urgency versus procedure. Question 16 asks how you handle it when a customer needs an authorization right now, urgently, but they don't have all the required documentation.
You can't just ignore the rules, but you can't ignore the urgency either. How do you thread that needle?
You have to acknowledge the urgency, understand the customer's need, but still firmly, yet diplomatically, explain that the necessary documentation is essential. See if there's any existing documentation you can leverage. Then work fast with the customer to get the missing pieces. The source mentions understanding the urgency, ensuring docs are provided, checking what you have, explaining the importance of what's missing, working quickly with the customer, and maybe even having specific protocols in place for handling urgent requests efficiently.
Sounds like a real high-wire act sometimes. And speaking of efficiency, just making sure all authorizations get processed in a timely way is crucial.
Yep. Question 20 asks directly about your strategies for that. Interviewers want to know you're efficient and effective in managing the overall workload.
So how do you keep things moving without sacrificing quality? Use systems for speed, set reminders, delegate if possible.
The source suggests using systems for quick data entry as a main strategy. But it immediately adds that accuracy is just as vital as speed. So you talk about double-checking info, making sure all the documents are there, setting reminders for anything incomplete, and, yeah, potentially delegating tasks if that's appropriate for your role. The goal is timely completion with accuracy.
Speed and accuracy, the constant challenge.
Yeah,
Okay, beyond the day-to-day tasks, the whole world of authorization requirements is always changing, right? New regulations, laws, policies.
exactly. Which is why question 11 asks how you stay up to date on those changes. Being proactive here is absolutely key.
So how do you keep your finger on the pulse? What methods do you use?
You list them out.
Right.
Reading industry publications, attending webinars or conferences, checking government or regulatory websites regularly, networking with other professionals in the field, maybe subscribing to newsletters. And the source also wisely points out you should mention reviewing your own employer's policies, because internal rules change too. It's really about showing a commitment to continuous learning.
Staying informed is practically a job requirement in itself. Now, some roles might even involve getting into the nuts and bolts, like actually developing the authorization forms or templates themselves.
Question 12 explores that. Having experience here shows a deeper level of understanding of the whole process and how important it is for these forms, which grant access to things or info, to be secure, accurate, and compliant.
Right, so if you've done it, talk about creating forms and how you ensured they were secure, accurate, compliant. If you haven't, maybe emphasize that you're keen to learn and you understand why having solid forms is so critical.
Exactly. The sample answer mentions prior experience, but also stresses understanding the importance of security and being open to learning new techniques or technologies to keep forms accurate and secure. That willingness to learn is always a plus.
That leads nicely into another really important protective aspect of this role, spotting potential fraud or abuse.
Oh, absolutely critical. Question 17 focuses squarely on your strategies for detecting suspicious activity during the authorization process. It involves being really vigilant when verifying information and sticking tightly to policies.
So what kind of red flags do you look for? What methods do you use to catch something that seems off?
You'd want to give specific examples.
Mm.
The source mentions things like maybe using data analytics to spot unusual patterns, comparing current requests against past history, really thoroughly verifying customer details like credit card numbers or addresses, and always making sure requests have the proper internal approvals, like from a manager. It's about having several checks in place to catch anomalies.
Adds a bit of detective work to the job description. And finally, contributing to the team often means helping newcomers learn the ropes.
Yes. Question 18 asks about your experience training new staff on the authorization process. This obviously requires you to know the process inside out yourself, but also to be able to break it down and communicate it clearly to someone else.
So if you've done training, give examples. How did you prepare? Make materials. How did you ensure they actually got it? Like breaking down the steps.
Yeah, describe your prep. Maybe you made an outline or gathered specific documents. Explain your teaching methods, breaking it down into smaller, easier steps, providing follow-up materials, answering questions. The source suggests it's really effective if you can mention positive results from your training, like maybe the people you trained became more accurate or efficient, and maybe management even noticed. That shows real impact.
Okay, so we've really taken a deep dive here into the world of the authorization specialist, using those interview questions as our roadmap.
Yeah, and it's clear it's a really multifaceted role, isn't it? You need that deep process knowledge, strict compliance adherence, absolute accuracy with data and records, but also really good empathetic customer skills, some tech troubleshooting, and that ongoing commitment to learning and security.
So whether you're actually aiming for this kind of job, maybe managing a team of specialists, or maybe you were just curious about this vital function that happens behind the scenes in healthcare and other areas, understanding these pieces gives you a really valuable perspective. Hopefully you've had a few aha moments about how complex and important this work really is.
Definitely. We've seen it's so much more than just shuffling paperwork. It's about being an absolutely crucial link in a chain, making sure services get accessed correctly and securely.
So what does all this really mean for you listening in?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting, I think.
Think about how every single one of these skills we've talked about, from explaining the why of a process to someone who's frustrated, to meticulously checking documents for any signs of fraud, to staying constantly updated on complex rules like IPA, all funnels directly into that core mission,
Yep.
making sure people get the services they need while also protecting sensitive information and preventing abuse. It's a role that demands this unique mix of careful procedural diligence and really crucial human interaction skills. It's a fascinating intersection, wouldn't you say?